There's a raise your hand process if you wish to ask a question. There's a way that you can raise your hand or press the chat. If you want to ask a question by typing it and then sending it to me, we can manage it that way. Or if you wish to speak, there's a chat feature, and that lets me know that you're interested in having a chat. So the agenda for today, we'll firstly ask Dean to do some opening comments, and then I will report to you all on a meeting that all the associations had yesterday with Victor Dominello, the Minister for Customer Service, our Minister that looks after gaming and racing. All the different associations across the club industry and the hotels were involved in that meeting, so I can give a report on that. Next, we want to talk about the vaccinations issue, both what we can do as an industry to support the process. The government's aim to get vaccinations, the rates of vaccinations increased significantly, and also the discussions about what might happen as with regard to allowing people in who have been vaccinated and not allowing others who aren't vaccinated, and the discussion about that and what the government's looking at and what the other industry representatives talked about on that. And then we'll talk about some other issues that anyone may wish to raise. And I'll just give a report on where we're at with the annual conference and other association activities that have been impacted by the lockdown. So that's the agenda for today. And again, I remind you, if you can stay on mute until you are given a chance, if you wish to speak, to wave, and then either Dean or myself will give you the call, and then you take yourself off mute so you can ask your question. But if you wish to type a question, you can use the chat box and we can go that way. All right, so I'm going to now stop the sharing and have a look at all your faces. There you all are. I couldn't see you all before. So welcome everybody, and thank you all very much for giving up your time today. Dean and I felt it was an important opportunity for us just to find out where you're at and what's happening and what your views are on where we should be going and what other issues that may be impacting on you. So firstly, I'll open it up to Dean, our chairman, to make some introductory remarks. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Gary. Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see you all. As I said, the board of directors and Gary and his team thought it was important that we just get together and hear from one another about what's happening. I was just making a comment before we opened the meeting just about this lockdown. It just feels more isolating than last year's lockdown. Probably for a range of reasons. The government support is not as significant as it was. Clearly, JobKeeper was a godsend. There is support out there, which is good. That's coming, but
what we can do, maybe with some internal resources.
This one feels a bit different.
Ellie or Sophia, little things like that.
Someone needs to put themselves on mute.
Yeah.
You're right. Good. Sorry. Thank you.
You gotta love the Zoom, don't you? Look, I'm joined by, I think, 4 directors I see there. There's Glenn from Ingleburn, Jeff from Dubbo. I saw Patsy there, and John Rafferty. So thank you for joining us. So on behalf of the board, we just want to welcome you. We want to thank you for your ongoing support. And my role is I just want to listen as well. Gary's going to give you an update. I'm looking forward to everyone's points of view with regard to vaccination. Clearly, there's a linkage between levels of vaccination and the ability for us to get back to some sense of normality. But it's a complex issue when it comes to mandatory for entry and for staff and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's something in particular really worth unpacking. And I just want to also acknowledge, we obviously coming at this from different points of view. Some of our clubs I can see are regional. So you would be continuing to operate, but I would imagine it certainly wouldn't be anywhere near normal. Some of us probably have a mix of both, where we've got clubs that are open, or venues that are open, and venues that are closed, and there would be a lot of us like myself where we're just completely closed. So it'd be good to get the different points of view. So yeah, it's just an opportunity for us to communicate as much as anything. So Gary, what I want to do is just hand back to you, and we're really interested to hear from your meeting yesterday with our Minister.
All right, thanks, Dean. Yeah, as I indicated before, all the different associations were involved in this meeting with the Minister. So Clubs New South Wales, leagues, clubs, golf, bowls, etc., as well as the AHA, the hotels. And there were a couple of senior public servants from the liquor and gaming, and the police, a senior police person there. So there was a pretty good spread of people, along with our Minister, Victor Dominello, and his Chief of Staff. And first thing we talked about was what will happen when lockdown does eventually lift. Firstly, we made the point to the Minister that we need more than a day's notice. That if clubs that have been closed completely, and with those in the Greater Sydney region and associated regions, are all been completely closed for the last 6 weeks virtually, and probably for another few weeks, we can't just open with 2 hours notice. There's a whole lot of things required. So we said that if the lockdown is to be lifted, please give us a few days notice so that suppliers can be contacted and we can start getting the food back in, the beer back in, and get the system up and running. And that was acknowledged as an important point. They weren't giving any indication of when the lockdown might be lifted, but we wanted to make that point. The second point that was made by our colleague Don Hammond from the Leagues Clubs Association was that after the last lockdown was lifted in June last year, a number of venues were getting conflicting advice or information from various regulatory representatives when people would visit your club, whether it was a liquor and gaming person or a police licensing person or a health department person. They didn't all have this, they weren't all singing from the same song sheet, and it was often quite confusing for venues to work out what they were allowed to do and what they weren't allowed to do. And one major issue I think you will all remember we were involved in was the space between gaming machines. There was conflicting advice between health department and liquor and gaming, which we have ultimately resolved, but it went on for a few weeks and a few venues were quite distressed about not being sure where they were allowed to have their machines. So one of the points that was made yesterday from Rose Webb, from the Liquor and Gaming Department, is that they have established a coordination committee between all the key regulatory departments, police, liquor and gaming, health, etc., and that they are all working together to make sure that they do have the same message, the same policy, the same interpretation of the health regulations, whatever they may be, when we are allowed to open. So that's an important to hear that that's happening at the top level. The point we made was make sure your people down the line, who are the ones visiting the venues, are all also completely coordinated and singing from the same song sheet. So that was an important point that we made yesterday. Now, one of the I'll talk about vaccinations in a moment, but I also raised the issue of the current level of restrictions that are imposed on clubs that are outside of the lockdown regions, the Greater Sydney region. The fact that there have been virtually no cases in any of those large, any of the regions we have outside of the big Sydney cluster, and yet they've got quite severe restrictions still imposed on you. Only allowed one person per 4 square metres, no standing while drinking, you must be wearing face masks, etc. And yet there's been no cases in those areas. Now, we were advised that the Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, is taking a particular interest in that issue and is examining what might be possible and is in discussions with health about what might be possible. That's not to say that they're going to lift them soon, but we've got the topic on the agenda. John Barilaro is aware of it. I will be communicating with his office today to put our case for our clubs in those regional areas. The point I made to the Minister was, if there is a breakout, if something happens, like happened in Orange a couple of weeks ago, the government's got the capacity to whack a very quick lockdown for a week on that particular local government area without impacting on the other regions. So why do we all have to operate in those non-lockdown regions with such restrictions when there are no cases? So the Deputy Premier is apparently taking that issue up and will be in discussions with the Premier and the Chief Health people on that issue. Now, we talked about the possibility of the Dine and Discover vouchers being extended. They run out on the 31st of August, and the Minister indicated that yes, that he's in discussions with the Treasurer to extend that again. I also raised the issue, well, most of the Dine vouchers have been used by people, but not a lot of people have been able to make use of the Discover vouchers, particularly when you're in lockdown and you can't go out to places, and asked, was it possible that they could be converted into dining ones as well, so that when we are able to reopen in the Sydney region and those who are already opened in country regions can get some more people coming into their venues and making use of those vouchers. And he said that he would look at that. He wasn't sure about that. Now, I also raised the issue of wanting to see if we can offer, if the government was prepared to offer vaccine vouchers. That people who have got both doses of the vaccine, both jabs, could then get a voucher or a couple of $25 vouchers that again they could use to have a meal in a venue, in a club or a pub or a restaurant or whatever. He said he felt it was unlikely that the government would go down the path of offering a cash payment or some cash incentive. He said that he was more than happy for the industry to do it. I'm sure the government would be more than happy for the industry to do it. So he said that he's got no problem if the industry as a whole or if individual venues wish to offer some form of incentive for their members through a voucher system. But he said that he did not feel that the government would go down that path of offering that sort of cash cost to them for people to be rewarded for having both doses of the vaccine. But when we get into the vaccine discussion a bit later, we can have some more discussion about that, whether or not you as venues feel comfortable about offering that, offering it as an incentive to your club staff and or your club members to get vaccinated. I know some clubs are already doing that in various forms, particularly with their staff. So we'll talk about that, the vaccine issue, in a little while. There was a bit of a discussion about the financial support for staff, but it was a federal issue, so the Minister really did not want to get involved in that. But as has been indicated by Dean already, the government money, the federal government's emergency payment system is not anywhere near as good as what JobKeeper was, because when we reopened in June, because we weren't still having quite a bit of trade, we were able to keep a lot of our staff on JobKeeper all the way through to September. That's not going to be the case this time. Once the lockdown lifts, all those emergency payments for staff who've lost hours in those lockdown regions cease. But our clubs won't be back to full patronage and full numbers coming in for dining and beverage and sport and whatever else. So there's still going to be quite a gap between what the staff are able to receive and earn versus what they currently are able to do. So that is a concern, but they weren't prepared to make any issues on that. That was a federal government issue, and we're encouraged to take that matter up with our federal representatives. The one thing we did say, I said, and the other organisations also reflected, we as a club industry have in large measure very large venues with large car parks and lots of space. We also have databases of our thousands of members, And we could use those to assist in the vaccination chase, to encourage more and more of our club's members to get vaccinated. And we are more than willing, in a lot of cases, to have our venues used as a vaccination hub. Some clubs have already done that. I think it's now up to about 5 or 6 clubs being used as a vaccination hub. And if you as a club have a relationship with a local general practitioner and or a pharmacy, then you could probably organise for your venue to be used as the place where the vaccinations occur. Because in most cases, pharmacies don't have a lot of space, whereas the club does, and the club has car parking and stuff like that. So we said to the government, to the minister, that we are more than happy to work with the government to try and achieve that vaccination rate that he wants, because it's become clear from the statements made by the Premier in each of her media releases, media interviews every day, that the only way the lockdown is going to be lifted is when vaccination rates are at a level where they can feel a bit safer about lifting the lockdown. And she set the target of getting to 50% or 6 million vaccinations by the end of August. And it's in our best interest to get those rates up as well, because if we want to open our venues, we've got to get those vaccination rates up. So I'd be interested to hear from people about your view about whether or not you would like to become a vaccination hub, and whether you've got relationships with general practitioners and pharmacies in your area that you could offer them the use of your space to do that. I think there's a couple of more steps that you have to do. You'd have to advise health department, etc., and liquor and gaming that the club was being used for that purpose. But I'd be interested to know if you were interested, what your view is on that concept of being a vaccination hub for your local area, and using your database, writing to all your members, emailing them, communicating with them through your Facebook and websites and stuff like that, to encourage them to come to your club to get vaccinations. So, Dean, I might stop there and see if anybody's got any response to that concept, or any other questions you want to ask about that meeting we had with the Minister yesterday. Now, I've got one person on chat. Dean wants to know if anybody is actually doing a vaccination hub at the moment. Is anybody who's on the call supporting a vaccination hub? Start speaking if you wish to. Take yourself off mute and speak. No. Do any of you have any views about becoming...
Gary,
yes?
Ross at Karua said they're doing it.
Ross, okay, good.
My question would be: is anyone considering it?
Morgan is. Yep. Yes, Morgan.
Yeah, we've expressed our interest to Western Sydney Health and gone through the process. We've been thanked for our time and put on a "we might call you" list. I've since escalated that up to our federal member, Michelle Rowland, member Greenway, and we are waiting to see whether that has any action or traction. So we've got 2 venues in Blacktown and Hubertus, which is out in the Liverpool LGA. So we're available, ready, happy to do so. We're just waiting to see what the response back from government is at some stage in time.
Okay. Gus?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. We've thought about it here, and we've had initial discussions with a practitioner. The issue, as I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong with everybody, is it's not about just having the place to be able to get vaccinated. I think the problem here at the moment still is the supply of vaccinations. If that was the case, I think a lot more would open to get this underway a lot quicker. But as it stands, the vaccination supply is the problem. I'm not going to have a doctor here doing 3 today, 16 tomorrow, and whatever. It's not worth their while, nor our area, I guess. So I think once they get that supply or the demand to a level that's comfortable, I think we should be able to get moving with the vaccinations and open a lot quicker than what we think. But at the moment, I think it's the supply that's a problem.
Gary, I think part of the problem also is the fact that some really strong protocols around once they action a vaccine, and it must be utilised within a certain time frame. So I think there's some strict epidemiology protocols around that can complicate the process as well.
Yeah, I think it'd need to be a process where appointments were made, and so that you knew you had 100 people coming in, so that you would be able to use all those vaccines. And Gus, with your issue about supply, I don't think there's a problem with AstraZeneca. I think, from what I understand, there is still plenty of AstraZeneca out there. I heard the government's general who's coordinating us saying he had 1.3 million doses available now that he can distribute around the country. The Pfizer is still, of course, a problem in that we still don't have access to very large numbers of that. But the AstraZeneca is the one that we seem to have plenty of supply. So I think, again, that will need to be a coordination thing. If you indicate to health that you're prepared to be a vaccination hub, then they would need to give you those protocols, as Bill said, set out what the process is and guarantee you supply, so that you could then set up an appointments program with all of your members. And the other opportunity, of course, is that most of you in those regional locations with large ethnic communities would have a good opportunity to communicate to those communities in their own language about the fact that the club is available as a vaccination hub, so that they feel more secure in using the club rather than going to a government agency and stuff like that, because apparently there have been some concerns about that, of going through a government agency, and the club may well provide a greater level of security for those people if they can feel that confidence. Is there any other comment on the topic of using clubs as venues for vaccination?
Gary, we reached out to a local GP who is doing vaccinations and asked if they'd be interested in doing it at the club, where there'd be more, you could really increase the number of vaccinations. And he liked the idea, but it wasn't so much a resource issue around the vaccine, it was a resource issue around people. So he's still trying to figure that out. So if there's a practice with a few doctors, they're fully occupied within the practice. So the other challenge is actual human resources to administer the vaccine. Which what we did is just go local, and who knows what might happen, but that would be something you could do if you're not getting anywhere with health. Talk to a doctor in your area who is doing vaccines and or pharmacist, and you might be able to do something there.
Gary, do we know what the take-up rate is in those venues that are providing a hub facility for vaccinations?
No, I don't, but that's an issue I can certainly try and find out, particularly from Mark Condy in Bankstown Sports. He seems to have grabbed this quite early. I'll find out from him and can let you know, because I'm going to write an email to all member clubs following this meeting today and my meeting yesterday, and I'll try and find that out before I send that email out to everybody. From what I saw in the media, Bankstown seemed to be doing very well. They seem to be getting quite a lot. And they're a club that does have a range of different ethnic communities within their feeder area, and they've been appealing to those communities, I understand, in their language, in their own language. All right, if there's no one else who wants to raise anything about that issue, on Patsy. Yeah, Patsy from Gosford has said, Dean has hit the nail on the head. The local GPs and pharmacists need the human resources and qualified people who can administer the vaccine. That's right. I mean, because you can't just open the door and have a few tables and chairs. You actually have to have professionals available in the area who have the skills to administer the vaccine and the approvals to administer the vaccine. Okay, well, the other issue with regards to vaccinations is the issue of whether or not the vaccine passport comes into play, whether or not we have a policy from either government or the industry that says, no, if you haven't been vaccinated twice, you can't enter the club. There was a discussion about that at the meeting yesterday. And the general agreement from all the different associations was, well, we don't want to go out on a limb by ourselves, because it makes it very difficult for us as venues if we are trying to impose a particular entry rule that's not applied across other venues and other types of hospitality institutions. So if it's going to happen, one, we'd want it to happen by government public health order, and two, it's all venues, all outlets. It's not just clubs that would be targeted in that way. That it would need to be a consistent approach by all types of venues, whether they're museums, art galleries, cinemas, as well as pubs, restaurants and clubs, that we don't want to be out on our own trying to enforce something that the rest of the community isn't. So no, there's been no government decision as yet. It's still a hot topic under discussion by both federal government and state governments. But I'm interested to hear what your views are on whether or not we would support a process whereby to gain access to a club, you would need to be able to show on your QR code, your Service New South Wales app or something, that you've had both vaccines and therefore can come in and not have to wear a mask and be able to engage in normal club activity. So I'm opening that up to discussion. What is your view? What do you think? Should we do it? Should we support it? Should that be what the government does?
Gary, you're right about saying it's got to be the whole industry, every venue. It can't just be the club industry. It's hard enough to make a buck as it is without turning away customers with their pockets full of money. Mate, it's got to be everything. Shopping centres, clubs, pubs, restaurants, the whole lot. We can't just as a club industry go it alone. If COVID comes into the town, we all get closed down. Even if we're on the high horse saying you've got to be vaccinated, we still get closed down. Mate, you can't do it by yourself.
Okay, right. John, you wanted to say something? John Rafferty?
Yeah, Gary, I don't see any problem with it. It sets us apart as clubs anyway. You can actually set whatever rules you like as to who you want to let into your venue to start with. So if we want to set those rules, why would we worry about it? I just find that people get all this worry about what happens on the outside of what occurs. Most people want to come out to the safest venue. And if that's the safest venue because you've got people who are vaccinated coming into your premises, more people are going to be keener to come to your premises.
Yes, Daryl Egan's raised the issue. He said staff also need to be fully vaccinated.
Yep.
One, for the protection of themselves, as well as for the protection of your patrons. And I mean, that's a job that we can do now in clubs. At the moment, we can't mandate it, I don't think, but we should be incentivizing our staff to get vaccinated and get both doses as soon as they possibly can. Because one, it is likely that particularly customer-facing staff will be required by government at some point down the line. They will be required by government to be fully vaccinated. I think that's where the federal and state governments are gradually moving to. Two, it's another, like John says, it's a protection. If you can say to your customers, well, all the staff in this venue are fully vaccinated, that makes them feel a lot safer as well. The reason I was raising the issue about being a public health order was because we didn't want individual venues being targeted by people and the door staff being abused by customers because those who try to come in who aren't vaccinated don't like it, and then try and take it out on your reception staff and your door staff. Whereas if we can say, well, this is a blanket rule, all venues, all places open to the public have to impose this rule it means that your door staff aren't going to necessarily be targeted as much as they'll probably still will be targeted by some people who are crazy. But anyway, any other comments?
Yeah, look, Gary, I'd agree with the group that staff have got to, we should lead the way. If we're going to lead the way, it should be through our staff first. But I noticed there was an article yesterday around Woolworths and their directive to hire security guards to check QR codes to make sure people are coming in. And their CEO said, well, it's a pretty tricky issue for supermarkets. I mean, there's a need for public safety. I agree completely. I think there's a need to protect our people, and that's perhaps where we all close ranks as an industry. But the risk we run perhaps is that if we make it too difficult for people to come in, tough enough to make $1, they're just going to go to a pub or their Woolworths pub locally, where QR coding in the supermarket isn't that tricky. So why would it be that tricky in a venue? I think there has to be some sort of unilateral sort of agreement around it, where it's all in or all out, because then the regulators who have to check the compliance on it, they're just going to be at their wits' end too, and it might just at an early stage just force an over compliance, and then we'll end up with 10 different views from 10 different licensing sergeants. It's a tough one, mate. I don't know the answer, but I know that there's companies that will just say it's too hard. Don't worry about it. Come on in. So,
Daryl Egan, you wanted to say something, or was it Daryl? The other Daryl.
The other Daryl.
The other Daryl. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I tend to agree that it needs to be a public health thought. I think we're going to ostracise ourselves out. I think the other thing that I'm not sure what the sentiment is in Sydney, but I think we're underestimating the people that still do not want to get vaccinated. And that includes a lot of my staff that are still going, I'm not ready for that decision yet. So I know there's a big uptake, but I still think we're underestimating the people that do not want to get vaccinated.
All right, Paul, you.
Yeah, Daryl. One of the issues we're having is I think all the bad press with regard to AstraZeneca has made people really, certainly out here, really cautious about having the vaccine. And because it's not in the bush yet, the urgency hasn't been there. I've got staff hanging out for Pfizer, and they've actually, there's no Pfizer in Narrabri. They're driving 100 Ks to Moree. I had a girl go yesterday, one of my staff members, to be vaccinated at Moree Hospital and or at the clinic there. And we've got more sort of queuing up to do that because there's no Pfizer vaccine. So I see that as being a bit of an issue as far as the staff are concerned, particularly young ones. They don't want to have a bar of AstraZeneca.
Yes. Well, the PR for AstraZeneca has been very badly managed for a few months now. And yes, that's why there is this hesitancy, even though the reality is that it's incredibly safe. And you take much greater risk walking out of your door every morning than you do in getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. But I understand why people are hesitant, and risk averse. Any other comments?
Sorry, Gary. My wife works in aged care, and just yesterday it became legal that every staff member must be vaccinated. She had 5 resignations on her desk yesterday. 5 of her staff refused to be vaccinated, so they've thrown their job in. So that's something you've got to think about as well.
Yeah, that's why Gary and I wanted to spend some time on this one, because when you first hear the idea that to get in, you've got to be vaccinated, it makes sense the first time you hear it. But then when you start to think it through, it comes with a few issues. And we've raised a few about the number of people who just won't want to, that just will refuse, and whether or not they'll find a venue that lets them in, even if it is mandatory. Their issues. The other one is there are some practical issues just around enforcement for a start. I don't know how that works, but anyway. And you need 2 doses. So if it's fully vaccinated, if someone, either a staff member or a customer, got a vaccine today, they couldn't work or come in till around Melbourne Cup Day for AstraZeneca. Now, that's if they exercise their right to wait the 12 weeks. Because you can shorten it between 4 and 12, but it doesn't work as well. I mean, everyone knows this. I'm not an epidemiologist. But there's a 12-week wait for AstraZeneca, and that's the most common vaccine. So how does that work? Is it 1 dose or is it 2? So it's problematic. It's a good idea, but it's problematic.
Jeff Colbeck, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just saying it's 2 doses. I had the first Astra, and it's 12 weeks before the second one. You can get it shortened to 8 weeks, but yeah. But then it's 2 weeks after that before it's actually operating, they reckon.
So is there any other comments? Because from what I'm hearing so far, you are in agreement that if it's going to happen, it's all of us in, all types of venues, hospitality, cinemas, everything. Anybody that's doing some form of hospitality and inviting people in for entertainment, recreation, etc., we're all in or none of us are in. Would that be right? That we generally all agree that if that's the way we want it to be? Because we don't want them walking out of our place and then going down the pub down the road and being able to walk straight in without being vaccinated if we've said they can't.
It's got to be applied unilaterally, Gary, I think, to be effective.
Now, and you know, Paul's made the point about there's still uncertainty, particularly amongst staff. At what point do we work on that issue with our staff, and how do we, I mean, I would rather have, at the moment, positive incentives rather than, you know, be vaccinated or lose your job. How many of you are actually contemplating doing something like that, positively incentivizing your staff to get vaccinated as soon as they can? Luke?
Gary, we're already giving our staff $150 if they get vaccinated.
Okay. And has that been a good take up, John? Are they largely taking that up?
Yeah, that's a pretty good take up at the moment. But all our managers are going ahead and doing it without the 150. So, you know, it comes from the culture in your organisation most of the times. You know, like I'm not even afraid, you know, when you were talking before about being the only venue, if we were the only ones to say, no, you can't come in if you're not vaccinated. Because we run our premises the way we do it, I'd expect that people still come here irrespective of how it is, and that's how we operate our business in Coff.
Okay. Luke Simmons, did you want to say something? I saw your thumb go up.
I was answering that, the encouragement piece. We're still, I guess, looking at that lead as to which way government sort of does move forward. We saw Qantas sort of look to go down that direction and then pulled back and realised they weren't going to have the workforce to probably deploy the planes that they needed. And we've got probably we already know there's a couple of staff that are in one of our northern venues that have a bit more of an affliction to getting the jab than probably in the Sydney venues. So we are cognizant of obviously the different views around the table, but we'll be certainly heavily encouraging and just at this stage, not sure on the whole lockout, you know, to the community if we can't guarantee that every single one of our staff members is going to be vaccinated. So we're just looking to understand that IR space or the people culture piece around, you know, how do you actually take the lead, and you can guarantee that you got 100% of your staff that are vaccinated, whether we take that full step that, we don't offer anyone employment unless they are. So we're still a bit on the fence and looking for a little bit of guidance. Okay.
Well, that's a good point. We can't say to our customers, you can't come in if you're not doubly vaccinated, if half our staff aren't. Right? If we've got staff members working who aren't vaccinated, the customers could rightly say, well, what the friggin' hell? What's going on? How come you let people work there, but you won't let me come in and enjoy your hospitality? So it's I think both parts are of the same equation. Both need to be done at the same time. Glenn, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, just the feedback we're getting from members of our team with regards to vaccination is not necessarily a negative view on vaccination, but is a biased view between Pfizer and AstraZeneca. So there's a percentage of the staff that want to get vaccinated, but they're not in the age group that qualify at this particular point in time. And given the limited supply of Pfizer, so they're waiting. So there's a general consensus of waiting until the Pfizer is available over the AstraZeneca. Despite the positive articles that have been in the media, there's a couple of articles in the last few days in the Sydney Morning Herald promoting the use of AstraZeneca. I've shared those on our WhatsApp staff app, but again, I haven't propagated that this is the way to go. I've simply supplied that as information that's generally out there to the public. But so that could certainly slow the process down for us. Similar to Luke, I'm probably waiting for some additional guidance, whether that comes through industry association or government, with regards to how far we can go with the incentives, which we can make the choice of course. And with regards to vaccination being any form of compulsory undertaking. Thank you.
All right, Glenn, and I got a comment from, I don't know if you all saw it, from Blacktown Workers, from Morgan, saying we're introducing a vaccination assistance policy which credits 4 hours of annual leave per jab. So that's another way of doing it. Andrew Walker says, what is the club's liability if a staff member has a negative reaction? Can some ambulance chaser lawyer have a crack at us for paying the staff? I think that has been already addressed, but I will take note of your question, Andrew, and see if I can get some advice about that. I understand, though, that there has been some, what do you call it, where you get a legal protection for people, you know, sorry?
Indemnity?
Indemnity, that's it. Thank you, Luke. I knew there was a word there for it. So we'll just have to clear that up as far as what it means for employers, etc. Now, Paul from Narrabri and then Luke had their hands up. So Paul, did you want to speak?
No, I'm good, mate. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Luke, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Glenn largely said it, but we've got near 200 staff that haven't been generally in that category to access the jab, just with such a large workforce under 40.
I think anything like this, any sort of public health order or requirements or rules that says you must be vaccinated to enter or you must be vaccinated to work here, is a couple of months away, right? We have to, the supply issues have to be addressed. The opportunity for people to actually access the vaccines in your local community has to be significantly improved before we can impose any sort of requirement. So any of this discussion about whether we let patrons in or we keep staff employed who aren't vaccinated, I think is a late November discussion. It'll be a ruling in late November or December. I don't think it's going to be happening now. What we can do now, though, is positively incentivise our staff to get vaccines, work with health department and work with our local suppliers in the area to see if we can encourage our club members to get vaccinated, because the one clear thing the Premier has been saying is that the restrictions and the lockdowns are not going to be lifted until she's satisfied that the level of vaccination in the community makes it safe enough to lift those restrictions. And that means we're in for some time continuing with the current restrictions. And so the more people we can encourage to get vaccinated and get those figures up, the better for all of us to get these restrictions lifted, both in the lockdown area and in the other parts of the state. John Rafferty.
Yeah, Gary, it's interesting you say that about the vaccinations and where Gladys comes from on that. Talking to our local members about it in the same issue is they were talking about England and when they've gone to be open and free, you know, their Freedom Day with what they've done with vaccinations, is it's shown that the lines, if you look at the graphs, the lines that they're showing there for the vaccinations now, they've still got 54,000 cases the first day after they went to Freedom Day. But the deaths and the people who go into ICU is far more reduced. So they actually can operate the medical system, which still allow people who might have a heart attack or other medical issues to be attended to. So that's why they're looking at getting people vaccinated that they can then open up. And that's really where they're coming from. And they're talking about, you know they won't get 100%, but they're talking that if they can get 100% of the people who want to be vaccinated, and if that's 70% or 60% of the population, that's when they'll look to open up.
Yeah, I agree. The problem, of course, is the public opinion on that. We've built a culture in the last 18 months where we don't want any rates of infection. We hate deaths. We've kept our death rates very low. And whether there would be an appetite to say, okay, well, we've got 70% vaccinated, the other 30% who haven't been vaccinated for one reason or another, okay, we're just going to have to cope with the fact that they're going to get sick and some of them are going to die, and we're just going to have to accept that. I don't think the government's at that point, and I don't think the public's at that point, but eventually that's where the conversation will have to go, because if they do open this up at even at 80%, there's still 20% of people who aren't vaccinated who are going to get sick, and the virus is still going to spread around the community. And we just are going to have to accept the fact that there will be hospitalizations, ICUs, and deaths.
Right.
All right. Any other comments about the vaccination issue before I move on to other issues? Gus?
Yeah, Gary, just on the incentive, on the incentivization and things like that, I just want to bring up a point that in many years gone by and for a long period of time, we had a program in place to the flu jab to all our staff for free. So we'd have a doctor on the premises with a nurse every year, and we'd go through that process. We got over 230 staff, but every year it was dropping down. So the last 2 years, we actually called it quits. We're getting less than 25% take up. So all I'm saying is with this incentivization, I think a lot of them in their mind would know whether they're going to get it sooner or later, whether they want it or whether they just won't. So sometimes I think incentivization might work. I think in other areas or other times it might not. I'm just putting it out there, that's all.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, even with positive incentives like the 4 hours added to your annual leave bank or the $150 that John Rafferty's doing, you won't get 100%. But eventually they'll reach a point where I think there will be some sort of mandating that they have to have it. But as I said, we're not at that point yet, but it is a discussion we're going to have to continue to have as an industry, and we're going to have to continue to keep a watch on this issue and see where we're going. All right. If we're happy to move on, the one other point that was made at the meeting yesterday by the minister is that it's the federal government that keeps all the statistics on who's vaccinated. Every time you get a jab, an AstraZeneca or a Pfizer jab, the first one and the second one, that is recorded and sent to a federal government agency, which has got some acronym, and it's the feds that will be able to provide the data, the record of who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated. And therefore, it'll be the federal government that will work out a process by which Australians are able to advise when they're trying to enter a venue or trying to get a job that they have been fully vaccinated. It won't be something that we get on the Service New South Wales app. And one of the issues we did have a discussion about yesterday with the minister was we don't want the check-in process to have another level of check-in added to it already. It's already very slow with having to do the QR code and other stuff. If we're then going to go to another app, a separate, different app to show, oh, here's my COVID, here's my vaccination record as well. So we said if there's going to be, we want the stuff integrated so that it's one thing. You check in and you show your vaccination record at the same time without having to change apps and go to different features, because we are aware of it already slows down. Now, it was interesting hearing the pubs whinging and complaining that they actually have to check in people, which they haven't had to do up until this point in time. So that was the other topic. Now, are there other issues? Oh, sorry, Darryl Egan.
We've had a lot of issues here where in Muswellbrook, we're on the highway. We get a lot of people saying they're going back to Central Coast or wherever to Greater Sydney. They've been out west and travelling back through. We've also got workers that their Sydney address is on their licence, so we refuse them all. Problem is they can walk across the pub, do the QR code, no one checks their licence. So we're trying to keep these people out of the area, but it's very easy for them to go to the pubs.
Okay. All right.
Harry, that was the point before about enforcement of they're doing the right thing and the person across the road's not. Yeah, it's wrong.
Yes, well, that's always been a problem we've had, where the clubs always do the right thing. They follow the government rules, but the pubs, our dear cousins in the pubs, don't necessarily do the same thing. We found that last year when the venues were being, fined, there might have been 2 or 3 clubs, but there were 20 or 30 pubs that were being caught out and found. So we want to make sure if there is going to be enforcement that it's done properly and that the pubs are properly enforced on this as well as the clubs. Now, are there other issues that you wish to raise that are of concern to you that are not about the lockdown and not about COVID, that or any other suggestions you might have for that you'd like me to take up with either the regulators or the ministers? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, Gary, here you go. So, a thing that's, I've had a conversation with you and also with Gus and a couple of other guys. I believe there's a really big issue out there for us at the moment regarding the RSL's new policy about being a director of a club at the same time as being on the executive of the sub-branch. Now, I've got a couple of directors, and our clubs, we own our club. Our membership's completely open. I've got 5,000 members. People are able to nominate for the board on their own merits from anyone within our membership. And I've got 2 directors who happen to both be on the sub-branch executive. And they're both, one guy's a long-term serving director. He's a sub-branch president, and he's been involved with the district council as well. I've got another guy, a lady who's been with us for about 5 or 6 years. She's a sub-branch treasurer. Now, these guys are going to have to make a choice as to whether they give up being a director, which is going to have a big impact on us. As you guys all know, finding quality directors is a bloody nightmare at the best of times. So I could potentially lose 2 directors, or they're going to both stand down from the executive of the sub-branch. And that for us is as much of a concern. I think in the country, the quality and the numbers of sub-branch members, given the age of a lot of them, people that are prepared to volunteer and be active and do all that legwork, those people aren't falling off trees. So I think it's a major issue, and I think it's something that we really, and I'd like to see a few probably power brokers, some of you guys that are tuned in today, get together and maybe go to the RSL and try and come up with some sort of compromise for this ruling. As I said, there's going to be clubs, and I know Gus is in the situation of being in a lot worse than we are, because he's got more directors who are involved with the sub-branch, but I think it's going to be the same issue across the board. So it'd be interesting to hear your guys' thoughts on that, and if it has any effect on anybody else besides us.
Thanks, Paul. Most of you will be aware that Dean and I have taken this issue up with RSL New South Wales leadership, and they were quite intransigent in not seeking. They extended the time frame by which it would have to be imposed, but they were not prepared to move, and they claimed that they would have the majority of members of the RSL supporting them if it was ever put to a vote. It is, for us, it's a ridiculous issue in that we've always indicated that The clubs that have a real significant problem are the 27, 28 clubs that are still owned by their sub-branch. Where they have sub-branch officers on the board of the club, then they are in virtually total conflict, continuous conflict of interest. And we said to the RSL, yes, that group of clubs, there is a clear continuing conflict of interest. But for the vast majority of RSL or ex-services clubs, where they have sub-branch officers on the board of the club, the times that there might be a conflict of interest might be 1 or 2 times a year, between where a matter that's impacting the sub-branch, such as Anzac Day or Remembrance Day or some other, giving some support to the sub-branch for its activities, happens once or twice a year. And within the Corporations Act and the way in which clubs are run, management of conflict of interest are handled. And there are plenty of rules and regulations and clear structures. And we tried to make that point to RSL New South Wales. We also made the point to them that the vast majority of their sub-branch officers who are on club boards will choose to stay with the club and will leave the sub-branch because they get much greater interest and benefit and ongoing engagement by being involved in the club board than the sub-branch. And it was really going to hurt them significantly if they continued with this policy. But they would not move. And Dean, I don't know if you wish to make a point on this as well.
Yeah, Paul, they just made excuses and said they had all these issues over governance. I don't think they were being fair dinkum. I really think their motives are different. I think the reality is they're looking to break down the whole sub-branch system. I don't think they see any future in it. And this is just an excuse. So why else would they do it? Makes no sense. I question their motives, honestly. So the only advice I could give you is for wherever possible, your sub-branch agitate if they have a mind to. I'm just really frustrated with them. Gary and I have kind of given up trying to get any headway with RSL New South Wales. They say all the right things, but nothing actually changes. I really question their motives, to be honest.
Yeah, Gus wanted to say, oh, sorry, Paul, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and I think I mentioned this to you about, the facilities that we have available to us, and Zoom obviously being one of them. You wouldn't have to be a rocket scientist to be able to train these people. We've already got the CDI that our directors can participate in. Surely there could be some sort of corporate governance thing for sub-branch executive members and or club directors that we might be able to facilitate. I just think if we let this thing, if we let them go ahead with this, it's the thin edge of the wedge. And Dean, you're spot on. I think it's an issue about breaking up sub-branches. I think it's about the power of the big state branch and the real estate that they hold and whatever in Sydney. And obviously, as I said, it won't impact my club from that perspective. We own our premises. I know there are a lot of guys out there that don't and have a prerequisite to be a director of your board. You have to be, some of the directors have to be sub-branch members. So I think it's going to have a massive impact on us, to be honest. And yeah, I don't know, Gus, you might have a turn, eh?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I totally agree with what Paul said, and I concur with what Dean said as well. I think the day that this comes, it will be a sad day for everybody, particularly the RSL sub-branches in rural and regional areas, as well as some of those Sydney areas as well. I think we need to understand how we first were established, and if it wasn't for those guys, we wouldn't be here today. That's first and foremost. Secondly, a lot of the board members, not just my board, but other boards, have other interests in other things that we do in our general lives or represent boards in other levels. So obviously in a professional board and corporate governance, when it comes to a board meeting, those people declare an interest, and either they leave the room when a discussion is had or they stay there and shut up. It's simple. I can't understand why in the hell that this can't apply to the sub-branch as well as the mother club or registered club. I just can't understand it.
Gary, sorry.
Yes, Patsy.
Yeah, I'd put a comment, I forgot to put my name, but like I said, watch this space. It looks like there will be a motion put forward at State Congress, but you saw what the comments I had made by Ray James to me about the whole thing, and I agree. They're trying to get rid of the sub-branches, and that means they will get the money, and they're not thinking about the whole, what the RSL was started about. I don't think they're looking at, like someone said, property and money and everything like that. And you know, the members aren't being liaised with to discuss their thoughts. It's just, we're going to do this and that's it. So, but as I said, Congress, I think I'd like to be a fly on the wall, but I know there is a few places going to put motions forward in relation to it. So hopefully something will happen.
Thanks, Patsy. I'll also respond to the point Paul made. Dean and I, in our meeting with the leadership of RSL New South Wales, offered them our support to assist with corporate governance training. We told them how the club industry has gone through this process for the last 15 years and how there is the CDI and how there's a whole training regime. And we, sorry, my phone is just ringing at me. And we said we would be more than happy to work with them for, at the local level and at the state level to assist sub-branch officers to be trained and to get all that proper corporate governance training. And they just said, oh, we haven't got the money to go through that process. We're not interested in going through a complicated training process. We just want to remove all potential conflicts of interest, which is an impossible thing to do because you can't remove all conflicts of interest at all times because everyone at some stage is conflicted. And it's about making sure, like Gus says, that you follow the proper rules. You declare your conflict and you're absent the room or you don't participate in the discussion. And Morgan raised the issue, isn't this an issue for other types of clubs as well? Yes, it is, because leagues, clubs, bowls clubs, golf clubs, they all have the same thing. They have the people who run the sport or the whatever the thing are also part of the licensed club board, and they have constitutions that say, well, I mean, I'm a member of Canterbury Leagues Club, and don't boo and hiss everybody. And they have 4 of the 7 club directors come from the football side. And it's part of, we're not alone in this respect, but the RSL is making an issue of it for us. And we just don't see why they need to do it. We've been saying to them for years, you need to fix up the 27 clubs that are still owned by your sub-branches and let our clubs buy them. But and they initially started on a good process with that, but the current leadership isn't really interested in facilitating that. And so it continues to be a thorn in our side. Now, Glenn Cushion wanted to say something. Your hand went up, I think, before.
Oh, thanks, Gary. Look, I agree with Gus, Patsy. In our particular case, none of the sub-branch executive or management committee are allowed to be on our board. That's a local component of their operating charter that they have. As CEO of Ingleburn RSL Club, there are members of the executive team of the sub-branch that I'd welcome onto our board. We do have a restrictive constitution still in place, which dictates that 5 of the 7 directors come from the sub-branch. But currently, none of the sub-branch executive are on our board. The other point that I want to make, and I agree with Dean, that there is, there is a motive and an intention, but I'm just not sure how they're going to enforce it. They put the rule in place, but do they have to change their constitution, their rules and regulations? I just don't know how they will enforce it, and they're going to undermine the integrity of so many boards and sub-branches by separating them and not allow people that are committed to their RSL club and their sub-branch to serve on both boards, good people that want to do the right thing. I just think it's madness.
Are there any other comments? Gus, did you want to say something again?
Yeah, look, I was just going to say, just to finish off that, yes, we've got about 4 directors, I guess, that sit on the executive of the sub-branch and also of our board. The majority of those people are Vietnam veterans. They are the ones I would think that are, I guess, executive of most sub-branches these days. Once you take those away, there's not too many of the younger generation that are standing in those positions. I know it's not my fault or their fault particularly, but attracting those new members to keep it going is going to be an issue. The second and last point I'll make is once this money goes back to head office and there's no sub-branches as such, think about the poor old Mrs. Jones, the war widow that you need to go and buy a reef for one day for $25 and you have to write to the head office to get a $25 voucher so you can go and get a reef. That's a sad day.
All right.
Can I just to finish off, I suppose, anybody who's out, any of you guys today, if you think this is an issue that's going to have a fairly big impact, could you send Gary an email, please? Only has to be short, and we might compile a bit of a list of, you guys, and try and get a meeting, a bit of a Zoom meeting happening or something, and maybe form a lobby group or something on behalf of the CEOs that sits outside our boards and sits outside of sub-branch to try and get the message across to these people of how we feel it's going to impact on our clubs and our communities. So if anybody's interested, if you just flick Gary an email and then I'll liaise with him, and I appreciate we might be able to do something. If we just let it roll over and let it happen, yeah, well, it'll be the thin edge of the wedge. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, for raising the issue. It is an ongoing problem and concern for us all. Are there any other issues people wish to raise? No? Okay. All right, I'll just give you a quick summary of what's happening for us as an association with the lockdown. As you would know, the conference, our annual conference, which is our major event of the year, was scheduled for the 12th to the 15th of September. And three or 4 weeks ago, we managed, or 3 weeks ago, I think, we managed to negotiate a new date with the Crown Plaza Hunter Valley. And it's now scheduled for the end of October, the 28th of October to the 31st of October. Now, that was me at that time trying to save the event. If the circumstances continue to be that we're in lockdown, then unfortunately we will have to make a decision at some point that it won't go ahead. If we're still in these sorts of conditions, then clearly the event won't be able to go ahead and we will have to cancel. That'll be a decision that the board, the association board, will make. But I'm hoping that we can continue to have the event. Hunter Valley is not in lockdown. It's just getting the delegates from the Greater Sydney region, the lockdown regions, up to the Hunter Valley. That is the challenge. The Hunter Valley, of course, like the rest of New South Wales, apart from the lockdown region, is got the 1 per 4 square metres. So if we're allowed to proceed with the conference, it will be a smaller conference. The maximum we can have is 280. Hello? Somebody called hello? The maximum we can have is 280. But we'll keep you posted. We'll be keeping a close monitoring on this issue. Now, somebody's not on mute. Okay. Now we're about to let you all know about our Focus magazine. It's been now produced, the August to October edition, but we are not posting it out. We are just going to be putting it online. You can access it and download it from our website shortly. Brad will have that set up and we'll communicate to all clubs about that. But if you can make sure your club directors and your senior management see that magazine, as you may well realise, this year is our 20th anniversary. It's turning into a bit of a bad birthday party, but there are a couple of articles in there about the fact that it is our 20th anniversary, and we were going to focus that on at our conference if we're able to hold it. Of course, other things like regional forums and stuff won't be happening between now and the end of the year, we need to cancel all of those. But we'll keep you informed about what's going to be happening with regard to the conference and the associated events around the conference closer to the mark. Probably if we can get some clear advice from the Premier as to what's going to happen in September and October, the board will then make a decision as to what we're going to do with regard to the conference. Please be aware, I'm here. I'm working 3 days a week, allegedly. So I'm still here to help. If there's any issues you have, please make sure you email me or give me a phone call. Let me know if there's any support that you need from us. If you've got any further thoughts about the issues we've discussed today, the vaccination issue and what's going to happen when we reopen, please send them to me by email. I need the feedback. I like to hear from you. If there's any issues where you're having some sort of struggle, please let us know. We are particularly concerned about the mental health issue with regard to all senior club staff, the senior management, including yourselves. So if there are any issues there where you need some assistance or support, please let me know. We'll try and do what we can. Apart from that, if there's no other comments or things, Dean, did you want to close up?
Just before we close, Gary, I made the point that this is different. Last year we had JobKeeper and we had no virus when we opened. Well, it was very minor. We didn't have this variant. So when we open, let me rephrase that. Would we expect to be open with this Delta variant still circulating in the community? It's likely, isn't it?
I think the government realises they're not going to get complete suppression of it.
So for those clubs, particularly the ones in Sydney, where this is, what do we think that means for the way in which we operate? Like from 2 points of view, like our customers and our staff. Because one of the strange outcomes of COVID was our issue with staff went from getting good staff to getting any. So I just wonder people's points of view and their thoughts on the environment we'll be operating in when we do get to open, especially initially. Do we think we'll have issues with the workforce, having enough workers? What do we think our customers' attitudes to going out will be? Because we can talk about vaccinations and the mandatory, but I just wonder what the level of optimism, I suppose, the level of feeling what it be. Look, eventually, in time, it'll be all right. But I just wonder what we think it might be like initially.
Dean, I think from our experience in the short term, I think hospitality has become a risk industry. And we're finding recruitment, like many people, I'm sure, a real problem, and then trying to maintain that workforce so that when you do come out of this, that you got the workforce that you can service your clientele. But we've had a lot of staff leave here because their hours were cut and they've found a more secure industry that's more protected and offers that security and longevity, whereas we become a real risk. And I think, to get out of that, it's going to be a long, long battle. It's not a short-term solution there, I don't think.
Other comments? Yes. Well, I mean, John Rafferty said to me he's not in a meeting at the moment, but yesterday he's 25 staff down at the moment. He can't fill 25 positions that he actually has. And so staff shortages are an issue, were an issue prior to this lockdown, and I think are going to be an even greater issue when we are able to reopen, because I think we have lost quite a few staff who have decided that they don't want to stay in hospitality because it is too high risk. They keep having their incomes interrupted, and so they're finding other work.
I think Gary, that we're doing a full circle. So from the lockdown of last year and reopening, I concur with a lot of them. We found it very difficult to fill positions again. Whereas this current lockdown for you guys and change of restrictions for us caused further issues. So I noticed somebody just said that they're 30% down. So we're anywhere between, in the last 5-6 weeks, between 30 to 50% down on F&B. Our gaming is maintaining. Our functions is non-existent. Our accommodation is non-existent. And if I could close all those areas in one hit and just keep the gaming going tomorrow, I would. It's that bad. Now we're in a situation where we've had to say to staff, you need to take annual leave. So we can't win. We're not in a position. So when you open back up, yep, you'll be chasing staff again. I don't think you'll find it as hard because I think people are looking for jobs. But at this particular point in our experience is we filled what we wanted, and all of a sudden now we're telling them we don't need you.
The big worry will be that if they lift the lockdown in Sydney, but maintain the very strong restrictions like are currently operating in the rest of New South Wales, those staff that you can't engage because you can't give them shifts because your customers are still quite low numbers, will have no other support because the emergency payments from the federal government will have ceased. And therefore, they're going to go and they're going to try and find somewhere else where they can start bringing in some money. And they will go to those industries which don't get closed down or which have only had a very brief close down, such as the building trades. And I worry about that, the fact that there's going to be thousands and thousands of our casual or permanent part-time staff that we aren't able to put back on because our food and beverage sales are so low. And they're not going to get any other income support from the federal government. So they're going to go and look for other work. John Rafferty, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Gary, just talking about what happened with our staff is we've actually kept our staff on because we wanted to make sure that we kept the numbers up. And we've been using it for training and doing other things like that to keep their hours up so that we can actually make sure that they're... Look, our gaming's still up against 2019. Our food and beverage is down 25% for that period. But, look, there's not a club out there that actually did pretty well, the bigger clubs that all made plenty of money last year. So you do have some money to reinvest in looking after your staff at the moment to actually keep them to maintain moving forward, particularly clubs like ours in regional areas that are still open. I feel a lot more sympathy for the people who are in lockdown in Sydney, like all of you other guys are in Sydney, because it's a very difficult situation that you're in because even when you reopen, it's not going to be the same as what it probably was last year when you reopened. So we've been able to continue how we are, and that's what we've been trying to do to maintain our staff. So all the concerns everybody's had with losing staff and everything else, we haven't had that same issue because we've been able to maintain our people accordingly.
Okay, any other comments?
Yeah, I might just make one, Gary. Maybe a long-term consequence of this whole thing might be our reliance on casuals and being able to give them the money they need to live. Potentially there could be a whole industry shift into having to go back towards permanent staff with more multi-skilling. So you've got them working across different departments to fill holes. But it's certainly a different world at the moment. The way people think and the way people their preparedness for casual labour, I think.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Well, Dean, did you want to say anything else or we wrap it up? You're on.
Thanks for everyone for taking the time. It was good to see you all. Like I said, it has to end. Apparently, it is a race, this vaccine. Who would have thought? But it will end, and we'll just look forward to the time when we can talk about this period over a cold beer sometime into the future. So, yeah, thanks for organising, Gary, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all. And I meant what I said. Please keep in contact with me. Send me an email. Give me a phone call if there's anything. If you want to just let me know what's going on, or if you've got something you want to raise with me that I can assist with. But thank you all very much for your participation today, and we'll keep in contact. See you. Bye.
Thanks, Gary. Keep safe, everyone.
All right.